Good morning. We are very delighted to have another wonderful turnout to the last in our inaugural season of STEM salons. We thank those of you who are repeat visitors, and we welcome those of you who are first-timers. We are really delighted this morning to have an expert lineup to talk about out-of-school STEM programs. It's a very, very important topic. I'm looking at some experts in the room who I know will contribute to a very lively conversation at the end. And that's really what these salons are all about, hearing about some things that stimulate conversations, but mostly listening to ideas and exchange of ideas from those in the audience. Today, Change the Equation released its most recent vital signs brief, which I hope you picked up at the back of the room, Lost Opportunity. It presents the first ever examination of how many U.S. children and teens participate in STEM programs out of school. We hear about these programs all the time, but what we haven't had much data on is how many people it's actually touching. And what we found, frankly, was disappointing. Young people spend the majority of their time out of school, and we, it seems, are missing out on the opportunity to engage them in STEM learning, especially project-based kinds of STEM learning, during this critical time beyond the school day. This morning, our panel will discuss how to expand access to out-of-school STEM programs, as well as how to measure and ensure quality opportunities for our nation's youth. It's not enough to go to a STEM learning opportunity. It's critical that that STEM learning opportunity actually yield results. The report would not have been possible without the research support of one of our member companies, Nielsen, and we have a representative from Nielsen on the way, and I'll be delighted to welcome him. He wants to say a few words, but we are especially grateful for the pro bono support that Nielsen gave us. So let me start by introducing the panel, then getting out of the way as they do their wonderful magic with you. First is Jen Reinhart, the Vice President of Research and Policy at the Afterschool Alliance. She takes a primary role in the Alliance's coalition building, policy, and research efforts. Clearly the right person for us to hear from this morning. Her recent projects include America After 3 p.m., a household survey on after school in America, and Kids Deserve Better. She joined the Afterschool Alliance in 2002 and served as interim executive director from December 2004 through June 2005. And prior to joining the Afterschool Alliance, she served for more than 5 years on the staff of the U.S. Department of Education for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. Next to Jen is Martin Storksdieck, Director of the Board on Science Education at the National Research Council. Martin oversees a wide range of studies and professional meetings related to science education and science learning. This work includes, you might have heard of this, the 2011 framework for the K-12 science education that is currently being translated into next generation science standards, as well as the recent Summit on Assessment of Science Learning in Informal and After-School Settings. In other words, part of the reason he's a wonderful panel member. He's explored a number of topics on informal or free choice learning, including learning science from media or museums, the way in which active scientists and science hobbyists communicate their passions to a broader public, and the ways in which schools can make use of out-of-school settings for better and more authentic science learning. Last on the panel is my right hand and my left hand, Claus von Zastrow, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Director of Research for Change the Equation. He oversees research at Change the Equation, and we have just recently let him out only for the purpose of this salon because he is knee-deep in work on the 2012 Vital Signs State Reports. And I might say, mark your calendar, September 12th 2012, is our next STEM salon. I think it's midday. I'm trying to look at someone who knows better than me. When we will release the state-by-state reports of vital signs. Most recently, before I spirited him away, he was executive director of the Learning First Alliance, where he worked to facilitate collaboration at every level of the education system. Claus will kick off the discussion this morning with highlights from our most recent findings on out-of-school STEM programs. Claus von Zastrow.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, it's true. They finally let me out into polite society, and depending on how I do today, it might happen again. So we'll see. As Linda gave you a bit of an introduction to the report, what I'm going to do is very briefly go over the methodology of the report and what we found in the report. Linda gave you sort of an overview already of what we found, and we're going to break it down into a little bit more detail right now. But I think the bottom line that Linda mentioned, which was disappointing, if not entirely surprising, was that participation in out-of-school programs in science, technology, engineering, math, and STEM is low. That, I think, has enormous implications that we're going to discuss today. Before I go into more detail, let me just briefly talk about the methodology. As Linda mentioned, we were very lucky to have the support of our member company, Nielsen, which, as many of you know, is a research company. They do a lot of consumer research, probably the most famous consumer research company there is. What Nielsen did is they actually allowed us to survey a national sample of households that they've assembled, a representative national sample. This survey was conducted in 2 waves as part of Nielsen's omnibus survey, which they deliver online every other month. And in this case, it was September and October of 2011. And it's called their Home Scan Survey. And it includes 88,000 households who are invited to participate, 61% of which responded. And of those 61%, that's about 54,000 households, 31% had students in K-12. So it was screened for students in K-12. And the question, and they had students in K-12 in the last 6 months, that was the question. So what we were able to do, since this is Nielsen's omnibus survey, was actually include a question that we could then look at in some demographic detail afterwards on out of school. The question is there, it's also online. The question actually phrased this, I should specify, as after school, because our survey experts were quite clear to us that no one would understand out of school, but then defined after school more broadly so that it could include things like summer school. It also allowed us to separate out who is at what grade level, sort of elementary grades, middle school grades, high school grades, and of course Nielsen has a lot of other kinds of demographic and geographic categories that allowed us to look at this in greater detail. So very briefly, I mean, this is the big overall number we got of those people, of those households. Now households are the unit of analysis here. 19% of households in the United States have children who are enrolled in out-of-school STEM programs. So in other words, 4 in 5 households do not. So before I get to the more detail, let's ask ourselves why this is a problem. And it's well known that we know that right now the nation lags in this math and science performance of our students. And that is something that out of school can help us to address, but at least as important, and perhaps even more important, there's a lot of evidence that our nation lags in student interest in STEM subjects. And out-of-school programs are among the only mechanisms we have out there right now to enhance student interest in STEM. As we see the narrowing pipeline, it's really the performance problems and the lack of interest that conspire to narrow the pipeline of STEM talent in this country, and it puts us at right now behind 26 other developed nations in the percentage of our graduates who actually get degrees in STEM fields. So there is a big problem here that we have to address. There is research that suggests that STEM out-of-school programs can turn the tide, although the research, unfortunately, is quite limited. It suggests that these STEM out-of-school programs can boost interest among students, which, as I mentioned, is very, very important because they are more likely than schools to have hands-on and real-world experience, which is really quite a critical component of all of this. It's also clear that out-of-school programs can complement the work of schools and help boost performance in that way. But it's also something we shouldn't forget, and that is that out-of-school programs are among the very few opportunities most kids in this country have to expose themselves to technology and engineering. The T and E of STEM, which often falls silent in this country, especially in K-12. So let's look at a little bit more detail now, in a little bit more detail at some of the breakdowns by grade level, by geographic location, and by demographic group. First of all, by grade level. We found that participation was especially low among elementary and high school students. To start with a little bit of relatively good news, right? We could say that it was the low-income students who had the highest participation of any income group in middle school, at least. Low-income students seem to have been targeted, and that targeting has apparently had an effect, largely in urban areas. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But we see rather disappointing numbers at the elementary and the high school levels. Why is this important? Well, in elementary school right now, there's been a lot of evidence that students are having much less exposure to science. Time for science in elementary school has declined a great deal. So a lot of kids in this country have very little exposure at all to STEM. And that's a critical problem. In high school, it's a more complicated picture, of course, because kids do tend to do more things out of school in high school on their own. But even there's a good deal of evidence that suggests that out-of-school programs can enhance student engagement and improve graduation rates. So this, too, is an enormous lost opportunity because for many high school students, the only exposure they get to STEM really is math and perhaps to some degree science classes in high school. There's not a lot of time, and it's a very limited type of exposure. And in states like California, I hate to pick on a single state, the science requirements in high school might even drop to just 1 credit for high school. So just imagine how impoverished the exposure is for some kids. That's a big problem. I'm going to talk a bit about geographic breakdowns, but before I do, I have to describe Nielsen's pretty colorful breakdown of different geographic areas that they've been able to create by analyzing their data in pretty specific ways. First, we have struggling urban cores, I think, which is quite self-explanatory. These are low-income urban neighborhoods, and they have large Black and Hispanic populations. We also have affluent suburban spreads, right, which I guess is fairly self-explanatory, but they're high income, largely white, and then the suburban ring of metropolitan areas. And the idea of a suburban spread kind of gives you the idea, swimming pools and movie stars. Then we have, this is where I want to live, comfortable country, because I like to be comfortable. And these are sort of the middle-class areas that tend to be in the metropolitan fringes or secondary cities, a little farther out. And then we have plain rural living, which sounds very, very wholesome. And this tends to be the most rural kind of areas. Now, these are small towns and rural areas with low population density, and they have the second lowest income behind these struggling urban cores. So, what did we find when we broke it down this way? Well, students in struggling urban cores actually are more likely to participate. This is a relatively bright spot in our findings. However, those in households really are getting the shortest end of the stick. So if you look at this, especially in middle school, in struggling urban cores, almost a third of households reported that they had students in the households in K-12 participating in STEM out of school. And the percentages were quite high in elementary and in high school. Could they be higher? Well, yes, certainly. But this does show us that a lot of the work that we've been doing, both in the private and the public sectors, seems to have been having an impact. And the 21st Century Learning Centers, on which Jen was working some time ago, could be one pretty critical factor there. However, when we get to plain rural living, things look pretty dismal. This is disappointing, but probably not surprising, as anyone who's been involved in out of school knows. The resources there are limited, right? The partner organizations are limited. There's not quite as much to draw on. However, it also means that students in rural areas are doubly disadvantaged. We already know that they have less access to sort of science and math exposure in schools, not to mention engineering and technology. Out of school is not helping at all to level the playing field. So we looked at affluent and middle class suburban students as well. These were the comfortable country and the suburban spreads. And there we found, frankly, that participation wasn't that much higher than in the rural areas. These were the mostly white areas. Participation is really quite low. Some might argue, well, these kids don't need it as much. Their parents take them to museums and things of that nature. But we have seen in a good deal of recent research that even our affluent students are lagging in the STEM fields. It's very hard to say, well, these kids are in a sense off the hook. That too represents a lost opportunity. In the final breakdown, we looked also by racial and ethnic groups, and we found that African American and Asian households are most likely to participate in STEM out of school. White households are substantially less likely to participate. There's a whole host of potential geographic, cultural, and economic reasons for this, but we thought it was a very interesting finding to illuminate at this point. So what don't we know? I mean, this was, we think this is a very important sort of first glimpse at what's happening, and particularly in STEM out of school. The Afterschool Alliance has done all of this very, very valuable research on broad out of school. But we still don't know quite a bit, and we'll have to know more. And for one, why is there such low participation? Is it that there are too few programs? Probably, depending on where you are. Is it that the programs are undersubscribed? Probably, again. And are they too expensive? Perhaps in some areas. But I think at least as important is the question of how good the existing programs really are. We really do not know. What we do know is from evaluation of individual programs, and the Afterschool Alliance has been very helpful in this area, is that there are excellent programs that have a very strong impact both on academic and non-academic kinds of goals, like enthusiasm and engagement. But we really don't know what the overall quality is. So it's very hard to say that, of those 19%, how many of these kids are getting the kinds of experiences we would like them to? And that's something that really does have to change. So what should we do? This is not, as you'll notice here, a prescriptive, detailed plan, but we thought that at this point we really should put a marker in the ground. We know that there's no single strategy that can address the diverse programs because problems that we have, because we've seen there's a lot of diversity in who's getting an after school and why. But we do know that there has to be a concerted effort, public and private, to expand access. And this can involve people in the private funding community, including corporate funders, who have already been very involved in after school. There's an enormous opportunity here to expand students' access to this important environment. But we should also be better promoting the programs that exist. And here we might give out a shout out to another Change the Equation company, which is Time Warner Cable, and they have something called the Connectory, where you can put in your zip code and find out what's in your area. Quite an interesting resource. But finally, it's very important to beat the drum for much better information about program quality. There's just all too much we don't know about the quality of what's out there, and without that information, it is quite hard to make the kinds of decisions we need to make. So thanks very much. I guess we'll turn things over to our next panelist.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Reinhart from Afterschool Alliance. And first of all, I want to say thanks to Klaus and to Linda and the team at Change the Equation for inviting me to be part of this conversation this morning and for bringing us this new data, which is, I think, hugely helpful, but also sobering. I think that if it's true that misery loves company, that's why I was invited here this morning, because certainly the STEM and after-school community has a lot of company in the after-school community broadly in terms of data regarding participation. And the community at large, I think, is disappointed in the availability of programs for kids across the nation, whether those are STEM-focused or not. So if nothing else, I bring you some company, I suppose, this morning. But I do think it's interesting to take a look at these data in light of other data that have been collected, in particular the America After 3 p.m. data that we've collected at the Afterschool Alliance. So similarly, this is a data set of about 30,000 households that looks at kids' participation in all kinds of after-school opportunities. And the truth is, we actually find slightly lower numbers in participation. So our statistic is about 15% of kids that are participating in after-school programs. So one reason potentially for that is just a matter of definitions, right? We defined after-school programs in kind of that 3 to 6 p.m., 5 days a week, like a comprehensive offering for kids. And that immediately, I think, would limit. We also sort of said we don't mean like a single specific focus activity or a club or a hobby or something like that. So there are things, I think, in the definitions that just make them different data sets. So, but while the overall number itself is different, I think what's really interesting here is that the trends are the same. And that gives me, I think, confidence in both sets of data, I suppose. Again, just the fact that we have some company in terms of what we found. So we have a similar finding in terms of rural and urban participation, where kids in rural communities are much less likely to have these kinds of opportunities in the hours after school. And again, this is speaking broadly about after school, not specifically about STEM. We also see the same kind of trends in terms of ethnicity, where African American and Asian kids are the most likely to participate in these programs. So that plays out in both this data set and in our data set. We see the same kinds of things in terms of income, with lower income children actually more likely to participate than higher income children. So all of those are playing out in both of these. The place where it's different, and I think is worth exploring a little bit, is the grade level findings. In our research, we found that the kids who participate the most are the elementary school age kids, and the middle school kids are right in the middle, and the high school kids are participating the least. Which is a little bit of a variance, where this research found that the middle school kids are the ones participating the most. And I'm just going to offer a little speculation from the side of the Afterschool Alliance about why that might be. Klaus mentioned this a little bit in his remarks, but really thinking about the focus at the elementary school level and how much, well, in general, the focus in schools being on what gets tested and how much of that plays out in terms of the content that's delivered during the school day, with so little STEM offered during the school day for elementary school kids. And then the goal of after-school programs to really align with what happens during the school day, so that they can say that they're supporting the learning that's happening during the school day. And of course, what we would like to see more of is that programs are really complementing what's happening during the school day. So you can be aligned with what's happening during the school day, but not trying to replicate what's happening during the school day. And so that notion of really being complementary, I think, is a real missed opportunity here at the elementary school level, where programs could really be providing kids with these engaging STEM opportunities at the elementary school level, and they're obviously not. At the middle school level, and again, this is speculation, but I think there's some research or some history here to show that programs have been designed more for middle schoolers, because people have seen over the years that interest in STEM tends to sort of drop off at this point, right? The content starts to get a little bit more challenging, and kids say, I'm not really into that, it's not worth it, I don't feel like putting the effort into this anymore. So there are programs over the years that have been specifically designed to sort of keep those middle schoolers interested. And after-school programs have taken advantage of that kind of curriculum that exists out there. And so that's why I think in this case, we actually see this little bump in middle school participation compared to elementary school participation. And then in high school, I think the content, again, continues to get more complex and more challenging. And so after-school providers are often scared, frankly, to try and provide that kind of STEM content for high school kids. And in general, just high school participation drops off for after school. It's a harder group to reach. They have a lot more opportunities in the hours after school. They have jobs, they have younger siblings that they're taking care of. So it's a complex place, I think, in particular, that high school after school scene. One example I wanted to point out on the high school level is work that's happening in New Hampshire, because I think, again, it's an interesting way to think about how do we complement what happens during the school day. And programs in New Hampshire are actually helping kids get course credit for STEM, for all kinds of subject areas, languages, where in New Hampshire, of course, the seat time requirement is lifted, so it's really about competencies, but kids are able to work with partnering organizations in the community and go out and earn course credit for their high school credits, essentially, that help them towards graduation. So this is a place where community partnerships are really playing a key role in complementing what the school is able to offer, and again, not replicating what the school's offering. So kids are going elsewhere because the content just isn't available in the school day, and it's something they're interested in and they want to pursue. There isn't a teacher at the school who's really equipped to provide that kind of coursework. So that's an interesting example at the high school level of ways we can really think creatively about, one, how do we give kids a hook at the high school level for getting involved in after-school opportunities, and how do we make it kind of count for them? I want to also look at a couple of the questions that came up. I was feeling like as Klaus was going through his PowerPoint that I could have just had a different set of talking points essentially for these same things that he was raising. So the report itself raises two questions. Why is participation low, and what do we know about quality? And I am actually going to start with sort of the quality side of things. How good are existing programs? We've been doing some research at the Afterschool Alliance, as Klaus mentioned, looking at this. So we went through basically the evidence that we could find, all of the different studies that have been conducted on STEM and after school, and tried to pull some themes from those studies. What do we know about the results from participation in STEM and after school? And this initial work really showed that programs are good at engaging kids, at improving their attitudes toward the STEM fields, at building some skills and proficiencies, and in some cases are even sort of helping kids go on to pursue STEM majors in college. And there's a little summary of that work on the back table if it's something you haven't seen and you're interested in looking more at. And that work really intrigued us enough to look more deeply at outcomes and indicators. And we are working on a project right now with Bronwyn Bevan from the Exploratorium, looking at what are the appropriate outcomes and indicators for STEM and after school. What is the after school STEM community willing to be held accountable for? What do we think is really feasible for us to be able to demonstrate some progress for kids, right? So this can't just be about test scores. There aren't a whole lot of people who are willing to just stand up and say, I want to be measured solely on test scores, right? We need to go beyond that and look at many other indicators. Not many, actually. We have 3 broad outcomes in a series of about, I think, 12 indicators at this point that we're examining. And we're doing this through a consensus finding project. So it's a Delphi survey where we're getting after-school professionals that have been providing STEM, and funders and state and local level policymakers helping us figure out the right set of indicators and outcomes. And hopefully this fall, I think, we'll begin being able to say a little bit more about what that is. But the good news is I think it really aligns with some of the findings from the overall research project that I mentioned. Generally, the field seems to be in agreement that we can deliver on engaging kids, right? That's sort of a first place to start, but we can't just stop there. It doesn't matter if we really engage kids if we don't figure out a way to keep them engaged and to get them to go on and further their studies. So engaging kids, getting them to think more positively about ongoing pursuit of the fields, building these kinds of proficiencies. 21st century skills, of course, come into play here, all of the things that we know that employers are concerned about in this country. So our goal is to really kind of hone in more deeply on that set of outcomes and indicators. And then the second question, really, why is participation low? So from our other research, we know that cost is a barrier. Parents report that cost is a big barrier to participation. Transportation is also a barrier that may be connected to kind of funding issues as well. And lack of availability, especially in low-income communities, is a top barrier to participation. We also know that parents who can access after school are really satisfied with the programs that their kids are participating in, that they think there should be public funding for programs, and that they recognize that programs go further than just helping kids be safe and really help them succeed in school as well. So we think a lot of the explanation really lies on the supply side. And I'm sure you're shocked, coming from an advocacy organization, right, to hear me say that I think it lies on the supply side. That there just simply are not enough programs in existence across the country right now. And that all brings us to kind of, what do we do? Where do we go from here, right? And I think that the recommendations in the report are pretty spot on. I think clearly we need greater investment in programs to increase the supply side. I think this report also highlights the need for a pipeline of opportunities for kids. When we look at that, the grade level differences, that sort of low in elementary school, a little bit more in middle school, and then dropping off in high school, I think what we really need to be able to say in communities is that there are opportunities at all of these grade levels for kids, and really get parents interested and sort of intrigued about, well, what could my kids do at this age? And then what could they do after that? And I was saying to Klaus yesterday, I often think of this in terms of like kids' sports, right? In lots of communities, you think about the parents know the right Pee-wee league to get their kid into, the team that their kid should be on, so that eventually they make the right travel team, and then they end up on the varsity team in their school, and they sort of have this whole map in their heads. It may or may not work out, right? But they have a map. They've heard from other parents the right sort of plan for their kid to be on. And we should have that for all kinds of after-school opportunities for kids, where if parents recognize that their child really has an interest in something, or an aptitude for something, or the child's just expressing an interest in it, then they know kind of a whole series of programs that will meet those kids, that particular child's needs. And I think the connectory sort of is a first step kind of in getting there, right? But we need more on the supply side to populate that, and then we need better linkages across the programs that are available so that it becomes more seamless in surrounding the school day and surrounding the different grade levels. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I think we need to continue to work on the quality side of things, and this work on outcomes and indicators, and work, of course, that Martin is doing as well. And then finally, I just want to offer one final step that I would add to the three, and that is that we need to dig deeper and collect data at the state level, which I know is obviously a huge interest of Change the Equation. We, in previous years, have not looked at STEM-specific questions in our America After 3 research. We do get down to the state level in our work, but we didn't ask STEM-specific questions, so that's a piece we intend to add in the next round of collection for America After 3, and that's a work in progress at this point. If all goes well, we hope to have new data in 2014. And fingers crossed we'll have, good things to say, that we'll at least see some increase from previous years to current years of participation. So I want to thank you for listening to my reactions and observations, and I look forward to hearing yours as well.
It's nice to come last and say yes to all of this. No, I want to thank Change the Equation and Nielsen for doing this. This is a really helpful first step. I call it a teaser. It's fantastic to begin having a conversation. The next thing I want to say is 19% is really a low number, I think. The good news, of course, is that 81% are taking part in all these high-quality after-school programs that teach them financial and literacy skills and arts and creativity and all the other good things that we believe are important. And hence, that might be the good news. Okay, maybe not. Okay. So no, I agree. This is a lost opportunity, and a lot of the things that have been said here are certainly mechanisms to help. I want to start by somewhat shorter remarks, since I'm 5 to 10 minutes. I interpreted the 7.5 to say that STEM is an acronym, a convenient acronym that came from SMED and is now MINT in Germany, and it's taken off. But it's actually that's S, then TE, and then M is a completely different animal altogether, as we all know. I mean, I think it's important to realize that this is not a homogeneous acronym and a homogeneous place of intellectual pursuit and conceptual space. In fact, right now at the Academy is the 4th meeting of a panel that develops a consensus study on asking itself, what does integrated STEM? What do we know about it? Where does it happen? What does it do? What benefit does it provide? This is a group that's, interestingly enough, had somebody from Rhode Island yesterday that talked about integrated STEM, formal, informal, after school, all blended together in an interesting approach. I found that very inspiring. There are people who really do very cutting-edge work trying to get this together. That said, in any survey, of course, you have the problem that even if you have parents identify science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, after-school programs that do that may not call themselves that. What about the environmental ones? The creek restoration program that kids can take part in. So there's a bunch of other stuff I think that we might be missing, but that just says that maybe the numbers might be slightly higher, but probably not much. Because confirming data from two different data sets, particularly one looking at individuals, one at households, where the difference could easily be explained just by that difference, makes it very confirmatory. So it is absolutely low, a lost opportunity. That said, there is the other part that I think is important here, is just how much of lost opportunity it is. Klaus was mentioning it, but in California, for instance, we know, just to pick on that state again, you know, they're big enough, they can take it. Not only are the high school requirements now on the verge of being lowered, but the data from the Bay Area, and that's certainly a very strongly supported area, suggests that the majority of elementary students get less than an hour of science per week. That means an after-school program or some informal program, some visit to, in any way, shape, or form, can be a significant dosage of science education. It's not this thing that you do and it's attached. It's complementary, but it might actually be the major science education experience that students might get. And when you look at the distribution, there's a whole large number of students who get even less than 30 minutes. So this is a real problem. So this is more than a lost opportunity, it's a tragic lost opportunity, I think. That said, it was mentioned that we were working on a framework with a new vision for science education for formal education. Now that vision for formal education says we need to take science education as it is done right now to a large degree and put it on its head. We need to start with the scientific practices. Science needs to be experienced through the way in which scientists actually do science. And not only that, we're saying this vision says we need to have a progression from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. This is not the isolated course I take here and there that's disconnected. No, scientific understanding develops over time, and we need to actually do this in schools in exactly that way. Both of these suggest that out-of-school, after-school, informal places have a huge role to play, at least in the short term, because we know perfectly well that while the K-12 system would love to do this, and many people came into the system to do this, right now it's been beaten out of them, and they need probably quite a bit of time to change to make that possible. So these places that only reach 19% have enormous contributions to make for formal education to actually become better. We know that a lot of museums, for instance, offer to educators programs for professional development, and they will probably need to do that even more coming in the near future. I want to mention that these numbers are low, these are very programmed. I mean, the way it's asked, it's clear to the parent that there's some programming going on. And I think to a degree, we may be underestimating the dosage of out of school, and Klaus, you were mentioning that at least people in higher socioeconomic status and higher education get. When you look at John Miller's surveys that he did every 2 years that are published in the Science and Engineering Indicators, you can see the degree to which people make use of out-of-school time that is non-structured, informal, or free choice, and supplement and expose children and themselves to that kind of experience. And you can see very dramatically how much that depends on the educational level of the parents and on the income of the parent. So that's a component that we need to keep in mind, I think. The next thing was mentioned by Jen, and I think it's a considerable one, and Klaus mentioned that as well, which has to do with the quality, and that has to do in part with the capacity of after-school providers to actually deliver the high-quality STEM education that we actually at this point in time believe schools struggle doing, where you have people highly educated potentially to deliver science or math or technology or engineering or a combination of that in any way, shape, or form that we deem is appropriate. What do we know about after-school providers, poorly paid normally, who are on the front line delivering programs? When I did evaluations of this kind of work, we certainly learned that there's a lot of capacity building that needs to happen to make that be the high-quality STEM education we believe will be doing the thing that Klaus wants it to do, which is motivate, inspire, and so on and so forth the students. And I think there's also a risk, which we learned from our assessment workshop right now. There's pressure, despite the fact that of the rhetoric going in a different direction. There's still this idea: what does it do to test scores? Does it do to knowledge? Whatever heck that means. And so there's a push by funders certainly to say, well, that's nice that you inspire, but what do they learn about the facts? And that is a risk, I believe, that after school and informals of all sorts, I mean, we have Bart Rock here, who represents ASTAC, the Association for Science Technology Centers, find themselves struggling to serve a formal education monster of 600 billion as an industry, while at the same time keeping its own identity and its strength, because that's a new rhetoric that we have as well. So that's a component I think is very important. And then finally, I'm probably here also because of the assessment issue. And the assessment issue is a very considerable one. There's one thing: the formal education sector is struggling finding good measures for just that, cognitive gains. We all are probably in this room in agreement that the measures we have currently are not appropriate. Even the assessment community would agree with that, but we use them nonetheless because we have nothing better. And let our system be guided by data that potentially we agree are not good. One can ask philosophically whether that's a good strategy overall for a country, and one could ask whether it's been serving us well when you look at TIMSS and PISA data. That's a different story. But let's not fall into the same trap in after school, out of school, extended school, and potentially informal and free choice. Our workshop, our summit, has certainly shown that there is an enormous need to become very sophisticated in measuring that which we believe should be the kind of bellwethers for our success in these places, and it's a non-trivial task. I mean, it's the best I can say right now without getting into too much detail about it. It is really difficult to do. I wish we would hold schools accountable for the inspiration. Imagine a principal not only responsible for erasing test scores, but for raising the interest, motivation, and engagement of students in various kinds of subject matters that we care a lot about. How would schooling look like if we held them accountable, and the superintendent for that matter as well? We don't do that. Why we don't do that escapes me, but it's a complex system. What can I say? Lastly, supply. I agree that the supply needs to increase, and particularly what needs to increase is parents, lower the barrier for parents to know and bring their kids to these. That said, supply is not all of it. Demand is another part. Let parents know it's important. Let parents know it helps their kids. Not only lower this. I give you an example of one thing that's an after-school program that I happened to evaluate a while ago in the Philadelphia area, where the major 4 area museums, the aquarium in Camden, the Franklin Institute of Science, the zoo, the Philadelphia Zoo, and the Academy of Sciences, which is basically a natural history museum there, work together to reach out through community-based organizations into poor or underserved communities. And it turned out, to sum it up, with free after-school, out-of-school opportunities and free meetings, the communities can come being bussed into the museums. And it turns out that when we are a comfortable middle class, no matter what ethnic background we are, we don't understand what poor people are struggling with. That was actually what I learned from this, being a foreigner myself and an immigrant, not the kind of immigrant people talk about, like Klaus. It's the same kind of immigrant, not the kind of immigrants people normally talk about. But the problem is, if you are poor, just taking a bus out of your area is an enormous effort. If you're poor, having multiple jobs, really getting your act together when you come home and you're exhausted to take your kids to a museum, even if it's free, even if they feed you there, is an enormous effort. So more is sometimes needed than even giving things for free, when free is actually a bit of a double-edged sword for people. So while the results in the struggling urban poor were encouraging that it's 30%, let's not forget that the other 69% are getting a fairly poor education in their schools, and they need it just as much. So that's something I find very, very important to point out too. With that, I'd like to close.
Well, that was a wonderful, wonderful panel discussion, and I'm sure the Q&A will be just the same. I hope that one of the big messages you came away with is that we felt humbled by the fact that this was but a baby step in the whole area of data collection. We're not overstating what it is. We were very pleased with the results, but we know that this field is so incredibly rich and that we need much more information, as we heard. At this point, I would like to introduce Tom Duffy and ask him to come up briefly. He's here He's the Vice President of Industry Relations at Nielsen. And as I said, we are ever so grateful because without Nielsen, we couldn't have even taken that baby step. And they have been such willing, enthusiastic partners that we may even prevail on them to take a bigger step next time.
Thank you so much, Linda.
And good morning, and sorry for my tardiness. The trains were not cooperating from Philadelphia, but I enjoyed your story about the Philadelphia situation that we have. Nielsen is a leader in marketing information. We track what consumers watch, what they buy, and this pro bono work is important to us. The continuation of the work with STEM education is something we wish to participate in with both Change the Equation and the other organizations represented here. So we look forward to working with you and meeting the challenge in the future. So, thank you.
It's great having good friends, isn't it? So with that, let me open for Q&A. We have a microphone, and I just would remind you this is being videotaped. If you could stand up and introduce yourself. If you have a particular individual you'd like to direct the question to, please say that. And let's keep it to a question, because I know there are lots of people and lots of enthusiasm. So, hands up, please. Yes, ma'am. Here's a mic.
Hi, my name is Anna K. Yagubian. I work at the American Association of University Women, AAUW, and we have a couple programs for girls that are out of school. One is a week-long STEM camp, and another is a day-long program for girls and their parents focused on STEM and exposing girls to STEM careers. And in beginning the process of sort of expanding these programs nationally, I would ask, in terms of evaluation and assessment, what do you think are some of the key things that we should be looking at in rolling out these programs and hoping to make them sustainable and find funding for them that would really key into sort of what is the most critical to know about what girls get out of them? Thank you. And that's for anybody on the panel.
The shortest answer, find a very good evaluator who understands what you're doing and who understands the kind of challenges that you're facing. I can certainly connect you afterwards with someone. And what's interesting here is you can find actually people who do this kind of work who already worked with programs that engage girls or women. And that might be an ideal person actually then to work with. There is actually people who do this and have been doing research on this, which is the other component. You're always struggling with showing that your individual's mostly shorter program has long-term impact. And that's actually a bit of a trap because you normally can't do that with an individual program. So finding the right kind of balance between making the case through literature review and then showing that the proximate outcomes that you are accomplishing will very likely contribute to that longer-term pathway, while at the same time opening up capacity for later on doing more longitudinal research through the kinds of data that you collect in the short term.
I might add that I think it was this week, or maybe it was last week, I'm losing track of time, Change the Equation launched phase 1 of STEMworks, which is a searchable database of programs that meet a set of design principles and a rubric that a committee of Change the Equation members created. It's on our website. And in this phase 1, we invited a number of programs. We had to work out the kinks and get everything, so we asked some guinea pigs to join in. 40 programs submitted their evidence based on a procedure that WestEd, a researcher, set up. And of those 40, 20 programs were admitted into the database. Later this summer, we're opening it up widely and invite anyone who has a program that they believe has evidence to submit to that process, and we will go through it. Any program that submits is promised confidentiality, so if you do not make it in, no one knows that, but what you do get is a report that summarizes the ways in which we think, based on our design principles, you could strengthen your program. This is not perfect. We suspect that the design principles and the process will evolve, we'll fine-tune them, we'll make them better. But we think that it's a vehicle to begin to change conversation between people who are funding and people who are developing programs. And by putting it on the website, we're pushing it not only to our own members, but frankly, to all funders.
There's also a good website to check out to make the larger case, greatscienceforgirls.org, which is AAUW and NSF funded.
Gentleman right here. Wait for the mic, it's on its way.
Thank you. My name is James Turner. I work at NOAA, but this morning I'm here for the Daniel Alexander Payne Community Development Corporation. You know, there are a couple of demographics that we have that we need to grasp and factor in. One, there's a large number of single parent households. There are also a large number of households where both parents work. So how do we design after-school programs, particularly those that are away from school, that take into account those two facts, and those are realities that we face?
Yeah, those are definitely realities that we face. I think one way to grapple with this, and it's not a solution, but is to really think about programs coming together to provide kind of this more comprehensive offering, right? So that programs in a community, if you're doing something on Thursday, that you're connected to other providers that are providing services other days of the week, and sort of helping really fill that gap for working families, so that it's not, oh, how do I deal with Tuesday's schedule and how do I deal with Thursday's schedule, but there's some web of services that are provided for those families where they don't feel like it's so piecemeal, which is why in our research we always focus on this kind of comprehensive nature of a program that eases that burden, I think, on families, because it is incredibly difficult on a family to try and figure out how to put all these elements together if there's not some cohesion to it. That, we think, is really one of the biggest values that the 21st Century Community Learning Center program has brought to the table, is putting some resources in a community with a program director, sort of a staffed person whose job is really to figure out what are the other existing after-school opportunities that are serving kids in this school, and how do I bring them more in-house and more coordinated in a way that gives kids a more comprehensive set of offerings as opposed to disparate opportunities.
And just the lowering of barriers. The program I talked about, Families Exploring Science Together in Philadelphia, came to conclude that you have to bring the programs to the community and lower the barrier there. I mean, it's much easier if you have to go to your local library, if you still have one, or your local church or community center, than if you have to actually travel to a museum. That the museums would have liked to have people come to the museum, explore the museum, realize this is a great place to go to, but that, at some point they realize we're serving this community and we need to actually go to the community. That helps a little bit. Bud,
Bud?
Hi, I'm Bud Rock from the Association of Science Technology Centers, and I actually wanted to focus a little bit on the after-school provider as much as the student. First of all, I want to thank Change the Equation and Nielsen for this. I'm on the side that says this is an extraordinarily positive report, only because it's like anything else. If you want to build a really great car, you have to recognize that you need the car and that you want it to be better. And this is a great step in that direction. There's a lot of emphasis on inspiration in this and the value of it, and I think that's important. But before we even get to that student, do we have programs, do we have ideas in mind that help us reach the provider of the after-school programs, those directors in the Boys and Girls Clubs and the teachers that are working outside of the classroom? There is a sense that if the teachers themselves don't value inquiry-based learning for what it is, don't see what that represents in the learning spectrum, that they won't take that experience and bring it back to the classroom, create that kind of a pipeline. So I know that for our science centers, 80% of them actually do teacher training programs. Should we be focusing first on the provider and have that draw toward the student, or are we missing a step in this, I guess is my question.
I guess I feel like there's sort of work to be done on all fronts, and that essentially we need to simultaneously be doing these things, right? We need to be increasing the quantity of programs that are out there, working to ensure that the programs that do exist are of the highest quality that they can be, and certainly professional development, that kind of staff training is a big aspect of that quality. We know, from some of the work that's been done in general on after school, that the quality of the staff interactions with the kids is a huge element in the success of these programs and helping kids do better. So I don't have a hierarchy in mind. I feel like sort of full steam ahead on a lot of different fronts in order to get there, but others may have a different opinion on that.
No, I agree. Yeah, you can't isolate any one of those. It's just like school systems. With the right assessment system, teacher quality, professional development, curriculum standards, you need it all. And the problem is always like, how do you get the right kind of sequencing done? But I would agree, you need it all. I would find it actually more interesting to find out, what about these parents who don't send? So the parents are something we oftentimes forget. That's the part I think that's very particularly interesting. What motivates parents to do this or not do it? What prevents them from doing it? Where else do the children go? What's going on there? How do they respond to the demands of their children? What demands do the children have on the parents? How does that system work that's on the demand side, that I find an important one to actually untangle to a degree? And I'm pretty sure there is research that does that to a degree, but is it specific for these kinds of offerings?
Carlos?
Good morning. Thank you very much. Carlos Rodriguez, American Institutes for Research. I've heard Linda report in other presentations that the private sector is investing north of $500 million, $700 million, just short of $1 billion investment in STEM, mostly informal learning across the sectors. And so I sit here and I look at a fifth impact, basically, and think, okay, so if we wanted to make a 75% impact or get 75% of the students all engaged in informal learning, does that mean we do 3 times $700 million? It's not happening. That's not going to happen. So I don't think that that kind of investment will be made. So I'm wondering if we're looking at other effects, not just engagement. What else is happening with the $700 million? What's informal science doing that isn't happening in classrooms that gets talked about in ways that really impact policy about science teaching, or STEM teaching? So I'm asking you to sort of talk about, from your own observations, what are those other effects that are in fact occurring that can begin to inform people about how to do science teaching better in schools?
Broadly speaking, what informals do very well is to let people be themselves guided by their own interest. So one of the things we can learn from that is, if you observe a kid in a science museum or in a good after-school program where they have some choice, you notice something about the difference between a factory-based industrial production education system and a learning system. And I think that's the difference in philosophy, in moving away from the notion that the system is there to serve the system, and it churns children through this and gets them out, versus it's the learner, it's him or herself who decides what to do and and that's a philosophical shift. And I believe that shift is actually occurring increasingly more in schools now as well, hopefully. But that's, in my mind, the underlying engine that we need to be thinking about.
Here we go. And I wanted to add to that a little bit, that there is a lot of opportunity there as well, because I think it's the Business Higher Education Forum that did research suggesting that there is actually a pretty substantial proportion of kids in this country who are proficient in STEM but aren't interested. Right. So in a way, these are the kids, not to say we should forget those who aren't proficient, most certainly not, but these kids who are already proficient or near proficient, it's not as heavy a lift to get them over that bar, but the interest is what is lacking. And so there is a way in which, if, as you mentioned, Carlos, we're not going to get every single kid into after school necessarily, the lessons, even for those kids who seem to be doing quite well, is that inspirational piece mustn't be forgotten, and I think it often is, especially in those kinds of categories.
And I would just offer one friendly amendment. You're right, Carlos, in citing the numbers, the amount of money that our member companies are investing in, but part of the reason they joined Change the Equation is a recognition that they may not be getting a return on their investment. And it was Anders who drilled that phrase into my head over a decade ago about the corporate need for a return on investment. So they recognize it. It's not all well spent. Of course, it's true, Nielsen to the exception, of course, that the companies say, well, it's them. Their investments aren't good, mine are great. But what Change the Equation is all about is really trying to create a portfolio of tools that corporate America and other funders can use to do their own self-evaluation. So I think that's part of it as well.
And not to confuse discussion too much, but the level of interest when students leave high school in STEM has been fairly steady over the last 30 years, 40 years. And it's steadily above a third of the students, almost to 50%. When they enter undergraduate, those who do, that's when it crashes. So one of the things we need to remember is that the system continues. When people move out of high school and go into STEM needing careers, whether that's through university education or elsewhere, or then STEM-related courses at university. That's where a lot of changes are needed at this point in time. And the question is actually what out-of-school can do to support that, so long as universities have a hard time changing, even though they are trying to do that.
A question over here in the back.
Good morning, Linda. Toby Horn, Carnegie Institution. Marty, you talked about this industrial model type, and we're looking at ratios too. One teacher and 25, 30, 35 students. A number of the mentoring programs have a much different naive to expert or adult to child ratio. And I'm very curious whether anyone has been looking at the role of mentoring, not just teaching strategy, or using mentoring as a teaching strategy to look at that impact.
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that in the after-school community, definitely the research, as I mentioned before, is really showing the importance of those kind of staff-student interactions, but kind of honing in on that, like how big of a difference does that sort of ratio really make? And there are definitely standards in the after-school community that recommend the ratio of kids to teachers or to staff members, but there may be others here who are more aware of that work too.
Here comes the mic.
My name is Roy Jones. Oops. My name is Roy Jones. My name is Roy Jones. I'm a board member of E.L. Haynes, which is a public charter school, but I've been part of a mentoring tutoring organization called Horton's Kids for the past 11 years, so I can sort of address that issue. And first, in terms of the ratio is 1-to-1. I mean, that is because it's expensive, but that's crucial. Okay. The second thing is in terms of what keeps people involved in the program. Because I've been involved for 11 years and been tutoring the same child for 8 years. And what it is this personal contact, personal knowledge. Everyone in that community, even those who aren't necessarily in the program, know the name of our founder, the name of the head of the program, the name of the many staff members, the name of tutors. So that's also a crucial aspect of it. And then finally, in terms of bringing the tutoring to the community. Okay, and actually, while having a base in the community is helpful, it's not necessary because we've gone from tutoring at the local library to having to tutor on the house to now have both tutoring at the House of Representatives and also having our own community organization. Where it is not as important, but the important thing is having your own organic transportation. We have buses, which are a major expense.
Yeah.
So those are the issues that say it's one-to-one, preferably not even one-to-one, but actually a permanent connection to a particular child. So each particular mentor, tutor, instructor connected with the individual child, because those relationships last years. Admittedly, 8 years with the girl I'm tutoring is long, but most tutors it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So so it's transportation, okay. Knowledge, a one-on-one, literally first name basis with staff members and tutors and members of the community, and then one-on-one, and then ratio 1-to-1. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right here.
Thanks. Hi, my name, same mistake.
It's a very live mic.
Hi, my name is Peter Guttmacher, and I am the Director of Programming and Curricular Development for the DC Children and Youth Investment Trust Corporation. And I wanted to see if something that we've observed on a local level is true on a national level as well. We've been doing STEM work for about 8 years now. We've done a great variety of STEM projects, and I've encountered that as well as the sort of the getting families and kids getting things to go where the kids are, obviously with staff, so many after-school staff not having the kind of formal science background or comfort, feeling that they lack the authority and expertise to facilitate STEM work, about meeting kids and staff where they live. Recently, we, with some money got from the National Summer Learning Association, did this urban environmental education project called What's Good in My Hood, where kids explore their neighborhoods, their own neighborhoods, and in the process learn about things like water use and electric use and waste management and habitats and things like that. Obviously, it's for younger kids. So I wanted to know, do you feel that some of the most successful trials in STEM in out-of-school time share something that brings, that where kids and staff can start out within their comfort zone and then build to something else?
I think that's a great model. I think it removes one of the big barriers, which is this sort of fear that I won't be perceived as really knowledgeable about this work. And it also establishes a different relationship, right, between the kids and the staff and their peers, and they're exploring things together. I think the other great thing about that, and this gets to something that Martin said before, which is that it really embraces sort of the way scientists work, right? Starting with sort of problems and just sort of tinkering and figuring these things out along the way as we go together. And it's not, I'm giving you answers. It's, hey, let's work together to try and figure out how this works. And maybe we go down the completely wrong road here, and we have to sort of regroup and go another direction. But as long as we learn something from that experience that shapes the next place we go to, I think, yeah, that's super.
And it's a co-discovery, but I understand that it's very difficult for educators to feel comfortable in this realm of ambiguity. And this is a real challenge, I would say that. But the other thing I like about your program, which was just yesterday at our panel being discussed, is the idea of significance to the student. The idea it's local, the idea that they see the benefit of it immediately. It's something that connects to their life. All these are elements, I think, that what you just described would be best practice. I mean, this is really, really important to do it from that perspective, not very abstract and far removed from the children's life. Then it becomes something that they can actually connect with.
So now how do we measure the impact of that?
Gentleman over there.
Hi, Gideon Sanders. I'm Director of Partnerships at McKinley Technology here in DC. As the Director of Partnerships, I'm constantly looking for opportunities for our students and making them available. In DC, as opposed to North Platte, Nebraska, we probably have a dearth of opportunities that we can give our students. How do we not oversaturate the students with opportunities to the point where they throw up their hands and say, I'll take that one, and it's not a good fit? How do we narrow the field to make it the best opportunities without making a drastic misstep by eliminating something that could be of great benefit to the school or the students?
I don't really know of any places where there's too many after-school opportunities for kids right now. I wish we had that problem in more places. Like, I genuinely wish that really was a concern. I mean, I do think looking, there is work to be done on sort of like gap analysis and looking, and this is something that city intermediaries are doing and state after-school networks are doing, is really examining across the state or across the city, where are the programs, where are the places that are sort of deserts, right, where there are virtually no programs available, and how do we get funders and get the public sort of more engaged and more interested in this to fill those gaps and not overpopulate, although again, I don't really think that's an issue at this point. So I think there are people working in the field to kind of ensure that programs get spread out a little bit more. But I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think, again, that idea of like a pipeline and connecting programs and marketing them jointly to families is an important thing to do as well, so that people do get a sense that there's kind of a menu of opportunities out there for kids. And maybe they try this year and it doesn't work out, and they try something else next year until they find that right hook, or next semester, or whatever that is.
And I wanted to mention something else, and of course it's challenging and it shouldn't be overdone, but that is, especially funders, as well as I would hope parents ultimately, want to have some kind of data on some kind of measure of effectiveness. I know it's what you're working on, and if there is a glut of opportunities, then I think the deciding factor, at least from the beginning, as in any market, would be, geez, which of these really suit my needs best, and which of these really will deliver on the promise. Not to task these people with evaluating and evaluating and evaluating, so they don't actually do what's at the heart of their enterprise, but it's something we have to consider.
And it may not be the direct answer to your question or your problem, but connecting with what you just said here in the front is the idea of theming things. So in other words, focus. And that makes it easier. Instead of having a large hodgepodge for students to choose from, where it's like kid in a candy store being, oh, what should I do? Focusing on things that you can create identity around might actually be helpful. This might not be your problem, but I think it's from a general perspective, it's an important thing to do, because students respond fairly positively to the notion that they can develop an identity towards something. And if there's nothing you can focus on, you can never do that.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, Marlene Kaplan, and I'm with NOAA. And we are a federal funder. And we, like our other sister mission science agencies, are losing a lot of our programs and our ability to make the connections and work in these fields that we would like to be able to do. So how do we do a better job making the case that this really is an all hands on deck, and that multiple contributions across a broad community is helpful, and that it's more than just money, but also bringing our scientists and our research to the table?
I love this question, right? I mean, this is at the heart of sort of what we do at the Afterschool Alliance, is trying to figure out how do we raise awareness about these programs and the need for additional programs for kids. And I think there's a role for everybody in this work, certainly, and that everyone should recognize sort of the end game as they getting more kids participating in these sort of opportunities, so they go on and experience the kinds of outcomes that we're all interested in them experiencing, specific to STEM or to life in general. One of the things I thought was interesting in the course of the conversation today was talking about the corporate investment in the STEM and after-school space. And I just wanted to highlight that actually the largest investor in after-school period is parents themselves. That parents are carrying the biggest burden, and in many cases rightfully so, right? In what's the Nielsen language, the suburban spread, whatever that community is, maybe that's the right place for parents to really be carrying the heaviest burden. But in those urban cores and in the plain rural living areas in particular, we know that we need a lot of support from a lot of other entities to help make sure that kids have these opportunities. And I think there's a role for all of us here, to talk to federal lawmakers, to local lawmakers, to state lawmakers, to highlight the importance of the programs, to continue working on this issue of evidence and what do we know about what works and how do we ensure that all these programs are of the highest quality. It's something I welcome all of you to get more engaged in and helping to communicate that to policymakers, to other corporate supporters to sort of the public at large.
Martin?
She knows my answer.
Sorry.
But one of the things, in general, if you're a federal agency, if you're a funder, if you're anybody who is threatened by having to focus, cutting back, or making a case, my sense is always it's not necessarily at the end point where you have data. It's at the beginning part where you have a conceptual model for the degree to which your programs, the way you've designed them, contributes to a larger policy environment that funds you in this particular case. For museums it might be different, for any organization it's different, but the real trick here is to make a good conceptual argument what it is in this larger ecology of learning that goes from conceptual understanding and training towards PhD level scientists to having a STEM capable workforce, towards having citizenship and consumers that are at least literate, sufficiently literate that they can become productive members of society, to the cultural argument you make, whatever it is, to have a sense, this is what my program does, this is what it doesn't do, this is where it contributes to this larger ecology. And then it's much easier to find the kind of evidence that you need to support that claim. But the point really is to make that particular conceptual understanding. Because I know, of course, many people have been historically evolving into their role. That's the problem that we all have. From museums to schools to after-school groups, everybody evolved. Nothing is designed. And that makes it sometimes difficult post hoc to say precisely what you do for a changing policy priority environment. But that's actually, I believe, what you need to do.
Klaus, any final thoughts?
Well, only that oh, sorry, I need this as well. I think the data are going to be helpful. I mean, you'd think I'd think that because I'm the research director. But in this case, to make a case for what should happen, at the risk of sounding like every researcher and saying we need to do more research, what Martin said earlier about this being a teaser is quite important, and that's where we have to get down to quality and impact. And if we have, especially in the corporate community, data on impact, and I think they're very attuned to this notion of inspiration as being very important, that makes it easier to make the case. And unfortunately, we don't have enough of those data yet, though Afterschool Alliance and others have been working very, very assiduously in that direction. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you again for coming today to a STEM salon, and thank you for those of you who voted with your feet by coming to several of our STEM salons. What my staff doesn't know, because it dawned on me this morning while driving into work, yikes, we need to send out a survey monkey and learn from the folks who have come to our STEM salons what worked and what didn't work so well. So don't throw anything at me, folks. It's coming, it's coming. But we really have enjoyed this inaugural season. But I have to first say that it wouldn't have happened without three people, and I would like to recognize three members of my staff. Celia Alicata, who, come out, who is the driver behind all these STEM salons. I just show up. Priscilla Briones at the back, without whom nothing would happen at Change the Equation. And Kathleen Healy, who I just sent out to bring back, stand up, come on, stand up, our Director of Communications, who has been so critical in helping us package our messages. I also have to say that we are unhappily saying goodbye to Kathleen, who is headed to Oregon. There's this gentleman, Rudy Crew, might be a familiar name, who has become the Chief Education Officer in Oregon. And Rudy has stolen Kathleen from us to be his Chief of Staff. So it's a fond farewell and thank you to Kathleen. Thanks so much.